Resound text. Picture this. You're a 23-year-old college graduate who just moved back in with your parents temporarily, and you're desperately trying to prove you're a functioning adult. Your mom has been cooking every meal since you were born, and you've never so much as boiled water without supervision. But today was gonna be different. Today, I was gonna cook my mom the most amazing dinner she'd ever tasted and finally earn my place as a legitimate grown-up in her eyes. If you're a young adult who's ever felt the pressure to prove your independence while still living under your parents' roof, this story is for you. It's about ambition, family dynamics, and learning that sometimes our biggest disasters become our most cherished memories. What started as a simple gesture of appreciation turned into a comedy of errors that would make even Gordon Ramsay weep. At 23, I had survived 4 years of college on a steady diet of ramen noodles, dining hall food, and the occasional pizza delivery. My culinary expertise extended to making microwave popcorn and assembling sandwiches. Yet somehow, I had convinced myself that cooking a gourmet meal was just a matter of following directions. How hard could it be? My motivation was pure. I wanted to show my mom how much I appreciated everything she'd done for me. She'd been working double shifts as a nurse throughout the pandemic, coming home exhausted every night, yet still insisting on cooking dinner for the family. I figured it was time I stepped up and gave her a break while proving I wasn't the helpless child she still saw me as. My mother, Linda, is a 52-year-old registered nurse who has been cooking for our family of 4 for over 2 decades. She's the type of person who can whip up a 5-course meal with whatever random ingredients are hiding in the back of our refrigerator. Mom had watched me struggle to make toast without burning it on multiple occasions. Her skepticism about my sudden culinary ambitions was not only justified, but probably a survival instinct. My journey began 3 days before the planned dinner. I spent hours on YouTube watching cooking tutorials, scrolling through food blogs, and convincing myself I was ready to tackle something ambitious. I settled on what seemed like a manageable menu: herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and homemade garlic bread, followed by chocolate lava cake for dessert. Looking back, choosing a menu that included precise temperature control, timing coordination, and actual baking was like deciding to run a marathon when you've never jogged around the block. But confidence was high and common sense was nowhere to be found. I made detailed shopping lists, drew up a timeline, and even practiced holding a chef's knife the way I'd seen professionals do on TV. Armed with my meticulously prepared list and YouTube-acquired knowledge, I headed to the grocery store. This should have been straightforward, but somehow I managed to turn a simple shopping trip into an hour-long expedition of confusion. I spent 20 minutes in the fish section trying to determine what fresh salmon should look like, eventually choosing what the guy behind the counter assured me was perfect for beginners. I wandered the produce section like a lost tourist, Googling what does fresh rosemary look like while standing directly in front of the herb display. The baking aisle proved particularly challenging. Apparently, there are 17 different types of flour, and I had no idea which one was right for bread. I ended up buying 3 different kinds, figuring I'd sort it out later. Spoiler alert, I would not sort it out later. The morning of my planned dinner, I woke up with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for job interviews or first dates. Mom had agreed to let me take over the kitchen for the evening, and she planned to relax in the living room while I worked my magic. I started early, way too early. My timeline said to begin at 3 p.m. for a 7 p.m. dinner, but I was in the kitchen by noon, convinced I needed extra time to account for my inexperience. The first sign of trouble came when I realized I didn't actually know how to properly preheat an oven. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I'd never paid attention to the difference between bake and broil, and our oven's digital display might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics. I decided to start with the garlic bread, figuring it would be the easiest component. I mixed what I thought was the right combination of flours, added yeast, and began kneading the dough with the enthusiasm of someone who'd watched exactly one YouTube tutorial on bread making. What I created wasn't dough. It was some kind of sticky, gray substance that clung to everything it touched like culinary quicksand. It stuck to my hands, the counter, the mixing bowl, and somehow managed to get on the ceiling. After 45 minutes of wrestling with what can only be described as edible cement, I gave up on homemade bread and decided to doctor up some store-bought rolls instead. Crisis averted, or so I thought. Confident that the bread disaster was behind me, I turned my attention to the salmon. The recipe called for the oven to be at 400 degrees, which seemed reasonable. I placed the fish on a baking sheet, covered it with herbs that looked nothing like the ones in the tutorial videos, and slid it into the oven. Here's what I didn't know. Our oven runs hot, really hot. What I thought was 400 degrees was actually closer to 500, and what should have been a gentle 20-minute bake turned into something resembling a salmon cremation ceremony. The smell hit me first, not the pleasant aroma of perfectly cooked fish, but the acrid scent of something burning. I opened the oven to find my beautiful salmon had transformed into what looked like a piece of charcoal with herb garnish. But the real problem wasn't the ruined fish. It was the smoke. Thick, gray smoke was billowing out of the oven like we were hosting a barbecue indoors. And that's when I heard it, the piercing shriek of our overly sensitive smoke detector. In my panic over the salmon situation, I had completely forgotten about the vegetables roasting on the bottom rack. While I was frantically waving a kitchen towel at the smoke detector, my carefully chopped butternut squash and Brussels sprouts were undergoing their own transformation into carbon-based artifacts. The smoke detector continued its ear-splitting symphony, and now there were two sources of smoke filling our kitchen. I grabbed oven mitts and started pulling hot pans from the oven, setting them on whatever surfaces I could find. In my haste, I placed a scalding hot pan directly on our plastic cutting board, which immediately began to melt and add the delightful aroma of burning plastic to our growing collection of kitchen disasters. The moment that would forever change how my family views my culinary abilities began with a simple question from my mom. "Honey, is everything okay in there? It smells like something's burning." I was standing in a kitchen that looked like a war zone. Smoke was pouring from the oven, the smoke detector was wailing like a banshee, there was bread dough somehow stuck to the light fixture above the island, and I was holding a pan of what used to be salmon but now resembled meteorites. The moment that would forever change how my family views my culinary abilities began with a simple question from my mom. "Honey, is everything okay in there? It smells like something's burning." I was standing in a kitchen that looked like a war zone. Smoke was pouring from the oven, the smoke detector was wailing like a banshee, there was bread dough somehow stuck to the light fixture above the island, and I was holding a pan of what used to be salmon, but now resembled meteorites. "Everything's fine, Mom," I called back, my voice cracking like a teenager asking someone to prom. "Just a little smoke, nothing to worry about." But as I said those words, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The smoke wasn't just coming from the oven anymore. It was also seeping out from behind the stovetop. In my frantic attempts to manage multiple disasters simultaneously, I had apparently bumped one of the burner knobs, igniting a pool of olive oil I'd spilled earlier. The sight of actual flames dancing behind the stove was the moment my confidence officially died. This wasn't just a cooking disaster anymore. This was a legitimate fire hazard. I grabbed a kitchen towel to try to smother the flames, which is exactly the wrong thing to do with a grease fire, and only succeeded in creating a small flaming torch. "Mom!" I yelled, abandoning all pretense that I had the situation under control. "I might need some help in here." Mom rushed into the kitchen and took in the scene. Her son standing in a smoke-filled room, holding a flaming dish towel, surrounded by the charred remains of what was supposed to be a gourmet dinner. Her nurse training kicked in immediately. "Step away from the stove," she commanded, with the authority of someone who had dealt with countless emergencies. She quickly turned off the gas burner and expertly smothered the flames with baking soda, something I should have known to do if I'd bothered to learn basic kitchen safety along with my YouTube tutorials. But the smoke was still thick, the detector was still screaming, and now our neighbors were starting to peer over the fence to see what was happening. That's when Mom made the decision that would turn my cooking disaster into neighborhood legend. "I'm calling the fire department," she announced, reaching for her phone. "Mom, no," I protested. "It's out. The fire is out. We don't need the fire department." But she was already dialing 911, explaining to the dispatcher that while there was no longer an active fire, there had been flames in the kitchen, and she wanted to make sure everything was safe. As a healthcare worker, she wasn't taking any chances with fire safety, regardless of how embarrassed her son might be. 10 minutes later, I watched through our kitchen window as a massive red fire truck pulled up in front of our house, followed by a paramedic unit. Our quiet suburban street suddenly looked like the set of an action movie, complete with flashing lights and uniformed firefighters marching toward our front door. The fire chief, a surprisingly good-humored man in his 50s, surveyed the kitchen with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every possible type of household disaster. He checked the stove, examined the oven, and used some kind of device to test the air quality while I stood there like a guilty child waiting for punishment. "Well," he finally said, suppressing what was clearly amusement, "I can definitely confirm that you had a fire. And I can also confirm that whatever you were trying to cook is now thoroughly done." His team spent another 20 minutes making sure there were no hidden hot spots or gas leaks, all while I died a little more inside with each professional assessment of my culinary crime scene. The neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, creating an impromptu block party centered around my spectacular failure. Before leaving, the fire chief offered some genuinely helpful advice about kitchen safety and suggested I might want to start with something simpler next time, like cereal. His parting words, delivered with a smile, were, "Son, I've seen a lot of kitchen fires in my career, but this is the first one caused by trying to impress someone's mother." Points for good intentions. As the fire trucks disappeared down our street and the neighbors gradually returned to their homes, I stood in my mother's kitchen surveying the aftermath of my grand gesture. The room looked like a tornado had hit a restaurant supply store. There were scorch marks on the oven walls, the lingering smell of burned fish and melted plastic hung in the air, and somehow there was still bread dough stuck to surfaces I couldn't even remember touching. I expected Mom to be angry. I expected lectures about kitchen safety and responsibility. I expected to be banned from cooking anything more complex than toast for the rest of my natural life. Instead, she started laughing. It began as a small chuckle, then grew into the kind of deep, uncontrollable laughter that brings tears to your eyes. Soon, we were both sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the wreckage of my culinary ambitions, laughing until our sides hurt. "You know," she said, wiping tears from her eyes, "in 30 years of cooking, I've never managed to get the fire department to show up for dinner. That's actually pretty impressive." That night, we ordered pizza and ate it by candlelight. Not for romance, but because I'd somehow managed to trip the circuit breaker and we were waiting for Dad to come home and fix it. As we sat there sharing pepperoni slices, Mom told me something I'll never forget. "Honey," she said, "I was never worried about whether you could take care of yourself because you couldn't cook. I was worried because you never tried. The fact that you wanted to do something nice for me, even though it ended with professional firefighters in my kitchen, means more than any perfect meal ever could." The lessons I learned that day extended far beyond kitchen safety. I learned that sometimes our failures are more meaningful than our successes, that good intentions matter even when execution falls short, and that the people who love us most are usually the ones laughing with us, not at us, when we fall flat on our faces. I also learned that my mom had always seen me as more capable than I gave myself credit for. She just wanted me to see it too. 6 months later, I successfully made spaghetti with marinara sauce from a jar, and Mom celebrated like I'd won a James Beard Award. We've established a new tradition. I cook simple meals while she supervises from a safe distance, and we keep the fire department's non-emergency number handy just in case. The story of my cooking disaster has become family legend, told at every holiday gathering and shared with anyone who will listen. But more than just a funny story, it represents a turning point in my relationship with my mother. The moment she stopped seeing me as her helpless child and started seeing me as her adult son who just happened to be really, really bad at cooking. These days, I can make a decent grilled cheese sandwich, scrambled eggs that don't require a chisel to remove from the pan, and pasta that achieves the technical definition of edible. I'm not winning any culinary awards, but I'm also not summoning emergency responders to my kitchen. The charred salmon and melted cutting board are long gone, but the memory of that day remains one of my favorites. It reminds me that love isn't always about grand gestures or perfect execution. Sometimes it's about being willing to try, to fail, to laugh at yourself, and to get back up and try again. So if you're a young adult trying to prove your independence, remember this: it's not about being perfect, it's about showing the people you love that you care enough to try, even if trying occasionally involves professional firefighters and neighborhood spectacle.